Hi, I'm Abby from Ratings.com. What's bright, big, and relatively cheap? You guessed it, it's the Hisense U8N. Following up on 2023's Hisense U8K, which was one of the best mid-range models we tested last year, this year's model features a new chipset promising better contrast and even more brightness. It's available in sizes ranging from 55 inches to a whopping 100-inch model, and like other models in the ULED lineup, features mini LED backlighting and quantum dot technology. But is it worth your money? Let's find out. The Hisense U8N is a premium-looking TV with thin bezels. It's not the slimmest TV we've ever tested, but it's still sleek enough to look good on a wall or media console. If you aren't wall mounting it, most sizes of the U8N come with a metal center stand, unlike last year's U8K, which had two thin feet. The new stand provides a lot of stability, and it's great if you have a narrow tabletop. You can also adjust the height to get more clearance for a soundbar if you need to. On top of that, it keeps most of the cables out of sight, with a channel in the back for cable management. If you get the 55-inch or 100-inch model, however, it uses 2 feet instead. The back panel is made of plastic, with a grid-like pattern that looks vaguely familiar. The TV also has a built-in subwoofer at the top. Overall, the TV feels well built. There's a bit of wobble, especially when using the high configuration of the stand, but it's not too bad. One thing to note, we noticed a dark smudge on our unit, of what appears to be dirt stuck behind the LCD panel. It's only noticeable at the pixel level when looking at the screen from a few inches away. But to be clear, this is a quality control issue and doesn't impact regular viewing, but there's a non-zero chance you might experience something similar. Most of the inputs are side-facing and fairly close to the edge of the TV, allowing for easier access when wall-mounted. The TV has 4 HDMI ports. Ports 3 and 4 support HDMI 2.1 bandwidth and 4K at 144 Hz. Thankfully, the eARC port is port 1, so you don't have to sacrifice one of your HDMI 2.1 ports to a soundbar. It can pass through all major audio formats, so you won't have to worry about getting the best sound out of your 4K Blu-rays, for example. Other than that, the inputs are the usual suspects: 2 USB ports, a digital optical audio out port, a LAN port, and an ATSC 3.0 tuner. The Hisense U8N uses version 12 of Google TV. It's snappy and easy to navigate, but unfortunately, like all TVs these days, there are ads all over with no way to opt out. New this year is a redesigned remote. It's a little sleeker, with a brushed metallic finish and the usual app shortcut buttons. But the real kicker? It now has backlighting. Fellow cave dwellers can now change the volume or switch between apps without having to turn the lights on and break the immersion of their binge TV session. The remote also has a built-in microphone and Google Assistant button, which you can use for voice control. The TV itself also has a mic built into its bottom plate, which you can toggle on and off with a little switch if you don't want the TV constantly listening for voice commands. Now, with all that fun stuff out of the way, let's talk about picture quality. The Hisense U8N has a phenomenal contrast ratio. With its mini LED backlighting, quantum dot technology, and 1600 local dimming zones, the U8N gets pretty darn close to OLED-level contrast. The blacks are deep and inky, and they stay deep and inky, even with bright highlights on a scene. Having said that, you'll still notice some blooming around bright objects and subtitles. There's also some wonkiness with lighting zone transitions, with some dimness in the leading edge of bright objects moving very quickly against dark backgrounds. This is an incredibly bright TV. That's especially true in HDR, where it can reach well over 3000 nits in a 10% window. Highlights just really pop on this thing, with bright specular highlights that stand out even in bright scenes. And with its very high contrast, it makes for a fantastic HDR viewing experience. When it isn't bugging out, that is. We experienced a bug that makes the TV much dimmer than it should be. It's inconsistent, but could impact your HDR experience. Thankfully, the old unplug it and plug it back in trick fixes the issue. Alternatively, you can switch the input setting from enhanced to standard and back to enhanced again, and the brightness should return to normal. If anything, this TV is almost too bright. It consistently displays HDR content at brighter levels than intended, though you'll get the most accurate picture in filmmaker mode. Everything is still somewhat over-brightened, but it's a lot closer to the target than it is in other picture modes. The U8N has an excellent color gamut as well. It has near full coverage of the DCI P3 color space used in most HDR content, and it has great coverage of the wider Rec 2020 color space. For the most part, colors are highly accurate, although bright greens, cyans, and blues tend to be a little undersaturated and a little off the mark. The TV also displays a wide range of those colors at high luminance levels, especially in the DCI P3 color space. Overall, colors appear vivid and bright when displaying HDR content. The TV's SDR brightness is right up there with its HDR brightness. It's more than bright enough to overcome glare, making it a perfect fit for daytime viewing. And hey, what do you know, it also has incredible reflection handling. Whether you've got ambient light streaming in through a window or a lamp reflected directly in your line of sight, the screen's glossy coating easily reduces reflections so you can watch without distracting glare. The viewing angle on this TV isn't great though. The best seat in the house is front and center. Move off center and you'll see significant gamma and color shifting, loss of brightness, and a generally washed out image. If you're the friend who's always hosting big movie nights with a full house and wide seating arrangements, you might want to consider an OLED instead. As far as colors go, the U8N has very good pre-calibration color accuracy in SCR. Colors are on the money for the most part, except for some minor inaccuracies with lighter shades of yellow and cyan and darker blues. Gamma is pretty close to our 2.2 target, but it tends to display brighter scenes a bit brighter than they should be. White balance is where it struggles the most, with a lot of gray and brighter white shades displayed with too much red and blue, resulting in a slightly off color tone. But thankfully, the color temperature is pretty on point. Thankfully for the purists among us, you can improve these inaccuracies with a little calibration. Like other Hisense TVs, it isn't the easiest to calibrate with higher grayscale values and its calibration settings not changing much, but you can still get it near perfect with some finessing. Let's talk about image processing. The Hisense U8N does a very good job of smoothing out low-quality content like streaming video. It smooths out macro blocking and artifacts really well in dark areas of the image with a good amount of details intact. It also does a decent job upscaling low-resolution content like DVDs or low-res streams. It isn't the best upscaling we've ever seen, with finer details being hard to make out, but it's good enough. The TV can remove 24p Judder from 24p sources like Blu-rays and native apps, but doesn't remove Judder from 60Hz sources like cable boxes and older streaming devices that don't have a match frame rate feature. But you can use the Judder reduction setting to remove Judder from 60Hz sources without noticeable artifacts. Like most LED TVs, the U8N uses pulse width modulation to dim its backlight. This introduces flicker that some people are more sensitive to than others. Thankfully though, the U8N flickers at a blistering 7800 Hz in every picture mode and brightness level, so most people are unlikely to notice it. The Hisense is an incredible gaming TV. Despite some black smearing and darker scene transitions, it has an excellent overall response time, resulting in minimal motion blur. That said, just like last year's U8K, there are some issues with VRR enabled. At refresh rates above 100 Hz, the response time becomes more aggressive, but at the cost of more overshoot errors. This is especially distracting when the TV hovers around 100 Hz, with rapid changes in its behavior when it dips above and below that threshold. You can get around this by using a fixed refresh rate, but it's not ideal for gamers who prefer to use VRR. Speaking of, the TV supports all 3 VRR formats, so you won't have any compatibility issues there. But the TV gets a little flustered, let's say, when displaying 1080p at 240 Hz while VRR is enabled. The on-screen frame counter shows 72 Hz. It starts skipping frames left and right with desaturated colors and improperly displayed chroma 444. The TV has very low input lag in its PC and game mode. You'll have a responsive gaming experience with little noticeable delay between your inputs and what happens on the screen. It's at its lowest at 120 Hz or higher, but remains fairly low even at 60 Hz. The U8N supports all common resolutions, but there are some caveats. It supports everything up to 4K at 144 Hz using either of its HDMI 2.1 ports. But as mentioned earlier, you'll have to disable VRR if you want it to display 1080p sources at 240 Hz properly. There are also some scaling issues that PC gamers should be aware of. Oddly, 1440p sources at 120 Hz are scaled to 4K when using a PC with an NVIDIA graphics card. The same is true for 1440p at 144 Hz with AMD cards. Other refresh rates, however, are displayed properly in 1440p. For console gamers, there's nothing to see here, as the TV is fully compatible with everything the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S have to offer, including auto low latency mode, VRR, and Dolby Vision gaming. Finally, let's talk about sound quality. Given there's a built-in subwoofer here, you might be wondering if the sound is good enough to ditch your soundbar entirely. Well, no. The frequency response is fairly balanced and the TV gets quite loud, but it simply can't produce enough bass to really make for an impactful viewing experience compared to a dedicated sound setup. So, should you buy this TV? Well, there's no doubt that the Hisense U8N is an excellent TV for the price. On paper, it's a no-brainer. With a contrast ratio and peak brightness that rival much more expensive TVs, as well as all the gaming features you could want, it's a very well-rounded model, whether for dark rooms or bright rooms, movie lovers or gamers, and everything in between. But there are also some things here that should give you pause. From quality control issues to bugs, and more bugs, this TV is far from perfect. It's worth mentioning that we retested our unit after Hisense advised us of a firmware update. This firmware slightly improved our unit's peak HDR brightness, PQ EOTF tracking, and some color inaccuracies. So you'll want to update your TV to get the best performance out of it. If you're looking for something more reliable out of the box, consider the Sony Bravia 7 QLED. It doesn't get quite as bright as the Hisense and has lower contrast, but it has better processing, a more accurate image, and you can generally count on Sony for build quality, quality control, and squashing any bugs before launch. Naturally, it has a higher price tag, but if you can stretch your budget, it's worth considering. Of course, if you want to save money, last year's Hisense U8K is still available, and it's a very valid choice that's just about on par with the new model. While we can split hairs and say that the U8N has better contrast and gets brighter with a faster response time, the differences are marginal in the grand scheme of things. So if you're on a tighter budget, you really won't miss much by opting for the U8K. Well, that's all we've got for the Hisense U8N. If you want a more detailed write-up so you can pore over charts and graphs galore, check out our full review in the link down below. Until next time, I'm Abby from Ratings.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. The new stand provides a lot of stability, and it's great if you have a narrower table. The built-in remote also has a nope. Nope. It's a built-in remote. It's just right there on the TV. It's called a button.